صل على محمد وآل كما صليت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وآل إنك حميد مجيد.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dearest sisters, my name is Sabal Taf. I welcome you back to our daily sessions. MashaAllah, this is our fourth session now, doing the Quran study in a different way. Inshallah, we will be starting with Quran recitation from Surah Al-Baqarah. Those of you who have joined all four classes probably know our way of starting off. Inshallah, I will invite Sister Aisha Amir. She did her recitation yesterday as well, and I introduced her. She is a volunteer of UKIM, and she is from Rochdale, and she is associated with the Neely Mosque, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Aisha. Assalamu alaikum. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you. So I will unmute my mic and you start, inshallah. Bismillah.
I will be writing Surah Al-Baqarah ayah from ayah 30 to 9, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة قالوا فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين قالوا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم قال يا آدم أنبئهم أسمائهم فلما أنبأهم أسمائهم قال ألم أقل لكم إني أعلم غيب السماوات والأرض وأعلم ما تبدون وما كنتم تكتمون وإذ قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس أبى واستكبر وكان من الكافرين وقلنا يا آدم اسكن أنت وزوجك الجنة وكلا منها رغدا حيث شئتما ولا تقربا هذه الشجرة فتكونا من الظالمين فأزلهما الشيطان عنها فأخرجهما مما كانا فيه وقلنا اهبطوا بعضكم لبعض عدو ولكم في الأرض مستقر ومتاع إلى حين فتلقى آدم من ربه كلمات فتاب عليه إنه هو التواب الرحيم قلنا اهبطوا منها جميعا فإما يأتينكم مني هدى فمن تبع هداي فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. Translation. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most beneficent. And mention, O Muhammad, when your Lord said to the angels, "Indeed, I will make upon the earth a successive authority." They said, "Will you place upon it one who causes corruption therein and sheds blood, while we declare your praise and sanctify you?" Allah said, "Indeed, I know that which you do not know." And he taught Adam the names, all of them. Then he showed them to the angels and said, "Inform me of the names of these, if you are truthful." They said, "Exalted are you, we have no knowledge except what you have taught us. Indeed, it is you who is knowing the wise." He said, "O Adam, inform them of their names." And when he had informed them of their names, he said, "Did I not tell you that I know the unseen of the heavens and the earth? And I know what you reveal and what you have concealed." And mention when we said to the angel, "Prostrate before Adam." So they prostrated, except for Iblis. He refused and was arrogant and became of the disbelievers. And we said, "O Adam, dwell you and your wife in paradise, and eat therefrom in ease and abundance from wherever you will. But do not approach this tree, lest you be the among of wrongdoers." But Satan caused them to slip out of it and remove them from that in which they had been. And we said, "Go down, all of you, as enemies to one another, and you will have upon the earth a place of settlement and provision for a time." Then Adam received from his Lord some words, and he accepted his repentance. Indeed, it is he who is accepting the repentance, the merciful. We said, "Go down from it, all of you, and when guidance comes to you from me, whoever follows my guidance, there will be no fear concerning them, nor they will grieve. And those who disbelieve and deny our signs, those will be companions of the fire, they will abide therein eternally." Sadaqallahul Azim.
Jazakumullah khair, Sister Aisha. May Allah reward you. Inshallah, we will resume our session of Quranic conceptual study of Quran. And today's speaker is Dr. Batul. And Dr. Batul is a UKIM volunteer and have been helping the organization actively in variety of areas such as Da'wah, New Muslim Care, her own local community in Cardiff, and youth area. She is, by profession, she is a medical doctor and working with NHS, and she tries to balance her time with her professional duties and her volunteer work. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Batul.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm well, thank you.
What are we learning today? What is the topic?
Inshallah, today's topic is rectification of earth.
Okay.
Should
Looking forward. inshallah. Looking forward. I'm going to mute my mic and Bismillah, you start.
Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everyone. Inshallah, like Sister Saba mentioned, we're going to continue our conceptual study of the Quran. So basically, that means we are looking at ideas and themes that we probably have known our whole lives, but looking at them through the light of Quran. Yesterday we were covering, and today also, we're covering the objectives of the Quran. So yesterday we covered worship, which is one of the objectives. Tomorrow we will be covering another objective, and today obviously we'll be covering one of the objectives of the Quran, and we will be doing it under the light of this conceptual study. So you're probably wondering what the topic is. The topic for today is rectification of the earth. And if you have a pen and paper to hand, that'll probably be very helpful as we go forward. If you have any thoughts, any questions, write them down. There'll be a chance at the end to ask questions and really get to grips with this idea. So inshallah, what we'll be covering today, the outline of the session in terms of content, is building on what we have, working together, overcoming difficulties, time to rest. And this is deliberately vague, so you're going to have to pay attention, and there will be a few extra surprises in there as well as we get going, inshallah. So I wanted to start off with a story. This is a story that has stayed with me for many years now. In fact, it's one of those stories that I can remember exactly where I was stood when it happened. And what I want everyone to do is I want you to listen to this story, and I want you to focus on how you feel when you hear the story. Focus on how you feel. So I want you to picture the scene. It's roughly December time. It's a busy A&E department, and I've just gone and seen a patient, and it was a very elderly gentleman. He's clearly quite unwell, quite confused, quite muddled, and it's his daughter that's brought him in. And you know, I do all the classic stuff. I take the history, I talk to him, I examine him, I do all of this, and I'm making my way out of the room. And the daughter says, "Can I speak to you for a second?" And I say, "Okay, yeah, that's fine, of course." And she takes me to one side, and she doesn't ask, you know, how will my father be? None of these sorts of questions, what I was expecting. She says to me, point blank, looks me straight in the eyes and says, "Can you keep him over the holidays?" And that story has remained with me for years, because it was so shocking to me, the way that she just said it like that. She said, you know, "Can you just keep him over the holidays?" In other words, she didn't really want to look after him over the holiday period. So she was asking, can we keep him in the hospital during that time? And I've got lots and lots of, sadly, quite depressing stories like that. So I won't bore you with all of them, but I want you to focus in on how you felt when you hear that story. Do you get that feeling? Because every person I've told this story to, and people who have shared stories with me, my colleagues, there's this heart sink feeling, you know, in your guts, you just feel it. You know that that just isn't right. As human beings, we have this amazing ability that we can grasp what is right and what is wrong. You know, we don't need piles and piles of books. We don't need lectures. Sometimes we have that feeling innately in us. We know what's right and what's wrong. And when you hear this story, did you feel that ache, that sudden, that's not quite right? And the second thing that human beings are really good at is, I will show it to you now. I want you to think of a tragedy. Think of a tragedy. Now, what's the first thing that came into your head? How many of us thought of something that is happening to you, to your family, in your community, to a friend that you know? Or when we think of the word tragedy, how many of us are thinking of another country, something happening somewhere else in the world? I've got a bunch of pictures on the screen. I want you to have a look at them. When I say food poverty, do we think about back home, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these sorts of countries, the global south, and think food poverty happens over there? Or do we think about children, having to go without lunch because they can't afford it? When we think about lack of shelter, do we think about the homeless person on the road at the bottom of our street? Or do we think about people living in slums? And I can go on and on. When we talk about addiction, what do we think of when we say addiction? Do we ever think about our own food addiction, our own social media addiction? When we talk about poverty, do we think about people begging, or do we think about our own selves at the end of the month struggling to make ends meet? And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this, is because as human beings, we are amazing at creating emotional distancing. We're amazing at just photoshopping our life, putting a filter on it so that people don't realize how bad things are. And actually, sometimes we don't stop and take the time to realize how bad things are and how much we might actually be struggling. And I want to build on these two concepts. This concept of us as human beings having a good moral compass, and us as human beings always distancing, always pretending things are okay, even when they're not. And so on a lighter note, I want everyone to look at the screen. I've got a lovely picture of a cat here. I want to ask you, would you like to be this cat? And I know it sounds like a silly question, but I'm pretty sure I could send this picture to all of my contacts and they probably would say yes. And I'm pretty sure most of us would say yes. And why would we say yes? Because actually, deep down inside, we all know on a certain level, our fitra, our natural inclination, we know that our current lifestyle, the way that we're living is maybe not okay. And we also recognize, looking at this cat, that is a wonderful way to live. That nature is inherently simple, it's balanced, it's beautiful, it's not chaotic. Nature lives in parallel to us. We watch so many documentaries, nature documentaries, and you see how they have families as well, and they deal with food and shelter and death and life and all of this. Nature lives in parallel to us, but nature is in peace. And we see that in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this in Surah Rahman, this idea of nature always being in a state of balance. Nature is in a state of balance. And inherently, we all know that. That's inside of us. We all have this understanding. And nature is so relaxed. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, there's this beautiful hadith in which he describes the birds. He says, if we relied on Allah the way we should rely on Allah, He would provide for us the way He provides for the birds. They go out in the morning hungry and they come back full. And we're going to come back to this concept over and over again throughout this talk, inshallah. But I just want to focus in on the fact that in our hearts, we already know certain things. And I want to build on those ideas. So let's answer the fundamental question of this entire talk, which is, what can we do to be a little bit more like a bird, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more in tune with nature? And the answer to that question is Isla. Isla is an Arabic word. It means reform, rectification. I feel like those words are not words we use day to day, so it's hard to kind of conceptualize what that means. But Isla is this understanding, is accepting that something isn't quite right. Something isn't quite right, it's broken, and wanting to fix it and bring it back to its natural state of affairs. So it's looking at our own lives and saying, you know what, there are some issues in my life, like there are some things that aren't quite right, and realizing that, and looking at the birds and realizing that actually the birds and the cats, they're living a good life, and thinking that process of going from one thing to the other, that is Isla. And now the reason why I'm speaking about this, because when we talk about our own life, it can, and we think about bringing change in our own life, it can be kind of frustrating. We think things are out of our hands. And when we talk about fixing the world, that's a whole nother kind of worm. Let's forget about what's right or wrong, but focus on how it's done. A lot of the times when we talk about fixing the world, we have this concept in our mind of protesting, of cancel culture, of sort of people just being kind of angry and frustrated, and people ranting on social media, and you see these short little clips on Facebook and on YouTube, argumentation, frustration, harshness. But the thing is, as human beings, we don't like conflict. Our bodies have this fight or flight response. And that's why when you see, say, small children, for example, they always go with the majority. And that's why people in general avoid protesting, and they avoid politics, and we avoid all this stuff because we don't like it. And actually, this is a reason why a lot of people take a step away from religion as well, because people think, well, religion, if you become a bit too religious, you're more likely to get in arguments and conflict with people, and life would just be easier without it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses this in the Quran in the most beautiful way in Surah Taha. And these are some of my favorite verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Taha, ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa. We didn't reveal this Quran to distress you. The purpose of the Quran is not to make things hard, and we're going to come back to that. And the concept of Isla, fixing, is not about making things difficult. It's about peace. And if you look at examples in the Quran, Allah, there are so many examples that we can go into, but just on a surface level, even if we just listen to these ideas where Allah's telling us that, we were enemies and He brought our hearts together and made us into brothers. He took people on opposite sides of the fence and made them into family. And then if you look at this word Isla again, this idea of mending, building bonds between people, this act of mending relationships is, one of the only good things that comes out of private conversations. We see this again and again in the Quran, this idea of fixing. And the reason why I'm using this word fixing, and the reason why there's a picture of a clock on the slide, if you're paying attention and you're looking at the slide, is because the idea of fixing something is inherently about peace and not conflict. Nobody ever sees a clock that's broken and gets angry. You know what happens when you see something, you find something up in your attic, that something old that isn't working, you have a desire in your heart to fix it. I'm sure many of you have seen sort of online shows where people bring in antiques and they get fixed. Nobody is ever angry at the clock for being broken. And we shouldn't be angry or frustrated at the world for it being in the state that it is. We should have a desire in us to fix it. And that's what I want to talk about today. Building that desire to restore that beauty in the world, finding the world not quite right and being, I'm going to be the person that fixes that. And that brings us to our first checkpoint number 1 of this talk. Rectifying the earth is a means of creating peace and restoring the balance. Becoming more religious is not about creating conflict. It's not about protesting. It's not about aggression. It's not about politics. It comes from a soft place, and it comes from a genuine desire to make the world a better place. And, everyone listening to this talk, the question really is, we've understood that Islam is about creating peace. And we understand that the Quran isn't here to stress us out. The Quran is here for those who are in awe of God. Those verses in Surah Taha, they go on and they speak about those who are in awe of God, in awe of Allah's world, who are sat here on this, Thursday afternoon, and are thinking, what? Allah's world is amazing. Nature is amazing. How amazing would it be to be a cat or a bird? This Quran is for you. So how can we decide what that better world looks like? This is the difficult bit, because big things, everyone can agree that lying, stealing, murder, all of these things are terrible. Everyone can agree on these things. But when it comes to other things, you see on talk shows, you see politicians, there's a lot of bickering. You watch any of these morning talk shows and every panelist is arguing about something and no one ever changes their opinion. Nobody in the audience ever changes their opinion. Humanity for centuries, we won't get into a history lesson, but humanity for centuries has disagreed. You know, it doesn't matter what your opinion is, but humanity has always disagreed about things. And the contemporary world, the world that we live in at the moment, the solution to that is everyone just does what they want. You know, don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about the larger picture. Everyone just, you can do your own thing. But obviously, life doesn't work like that. Our personal decisions affect other people. I think the best example of that is COVID-19. You know, the choices we make on a personal level affect others. And the alternative is that if we're not all just doing our own thing and someone is telling us what to do, then let's look at COVID again. We were told to wear masks. We were told to social distance. We were told to do a lot of things. And many people struggled. And there's a reason behind that. We shouldn't dismiss anything. We should always think about what the reason is. And the reason is, as human beings, we don't like taking orders from another person. We really don't like doing it. It doesn't matter who the other person is. You know, as a doctor, I've spoken to so many people and told them, you know, to eat healthy, to stop smoking, stop drinking, these sorts of things. I can think of about 2 people who may have actually done it. We know, as human beings, we don't like taking orders from other people. And the reason is we always think, well, who are they to tell me how to live? They don't know my situation. You know, I'm right, they're wrong. And this is the reason that we struggle to decide on what this better world should look like. But this is so important because these are valid questions that we're asking. What right does another person have to tell us how to behave? They don't. You know, what right do we have about another person to tell them what to do? What guarantee do we have that the thing we're telling them to do is right? We don't. And then this is the beautiful bit. This is the amazing bit. We don't have the right to tell other people. But the only being that fulfills all 3 of these requirements that we need is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only being that has the true authority to tell us. To Allah belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than our jugular. You know, He knows us better than we know our own selves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the truth, the reality. And this is, you know, this is the beautiful thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that can direct us, and that as human beings, we would be satisfied with that direction. I hope that makes sense. As human beings, our nature is that we don't like taking orders from other human beings because of these 3 reasons. And the only being to, you know, fulfill these 3 things is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really, this leads us back to our next checkpoint, that self-reflection would lead you back to Allah. The reason, sisters, that we're covering this material in this order is because I want to show you something very important, something that we often forget, that our nature leads us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when we take time to reflect on what we're comfortable with and what we're not, we will always end up going back, turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is Shaitan's deception that keeps us confused and makes us not think about things and sends us on holiday every weekend and every month. All of these distractions, that's why we forget about Allah. But if we actually took the time not to do anything amazing, not to sit and read books upon books upon books, but just to reflect about our own nature, it would lead us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really, it's reminding me of a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, to take fatwa from your own heart sometimes. Our heart, our body, everything, all of us belongs to Allah. And the question is, why? Why will self-reflection on right and wrong lead us back to Allah? And it's because of a gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. And actually what's really profound is today the recitation at the beginning is to do with this story. So the sister's gone over the Arabic and the direct translation, so I'll just paraphrase. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man, the angels were concerned about, bloodshed on the earth, about corruption. And something profound happens here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Adam alayhi salam the names of things. Now the story continues on, but I want to stop it here and I want to focus on this. This is a gift that Allah has given us as human beings, that we can name things, we can categorize things, we can identify, and we have an awareness. And we see that gift again, when Adam and Hawa, when they eat from the fruit and they want to cover their nakedness, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives Adam some more words and teaches him how to repent. As human beings, we are able to categorize things into right and wrong. We have a choice, and that gift, the gift of choosing, but also the gift of just being able to weigh things up and decide, because we won't get into the science of it, but there's so many parts of your brain that have to come together for you to be able to do that. That comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of this comes from Allah. Your nature that tells every human being, and when I say you, I mean all of us, in her Muslim, non-Muslim, everyone. Our nature that tells us what's right and wrong comes from Allah. And that is the only way we will find consensus about things. We can't just all do our own thing. We have to go back to the source. And so to make the world a better place, because that's really what we're talking about today, we have to accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's reality. Because when we try to define morality ourselves, we create a bit of a mess. I think I've got a picture up on the slide of a toddler reaching for a hot pan. And this, I think, is the perfect example of what our community looks like at the moment. Because imagine that toddler trying to touch something hot over and over and over again, and the parents stopping them because they're like, because the child doesn't understand that it's hot. The child doesn't have an understanding of something is bad or not good for them. And that's what our community looks like. We've touched sin over and over again. Our own children are, I can't even say what our own children are doing if you understand what I'm saying. We have issues within our families, we have issues within our finances, our relationships with people, the stress, the anxiety. We are experiencing the negative consequences of touching that hot stove over and over again. And now as a community, it's time to rebuild. And this is step one to building a better world. It's resetting that moral compass. It's about everyone agreeing about what the future should look like and having that one vision for that future, having that trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the same way Adam alayhi salam did. Adam alayhi salam was given these words and he trusted Allah and he just accepted that those are the names of those things. The same way that the birds, they fly out in the morning, in that same way. And so now you know how to make the world better. But now you got to want to. This is the key part. It's one thing to know, because all of us, if not most of us listening today, were born into Islam. We've had Islam our whole life. This whole preamble that I've just said, maybe it wasn't even necessary. I'm sure everyone here was you might be sitting thinking, well, I already knew that Islam was right. Why is Bakul telling me again? I'm telling you again because of this. We have to care. We have to care about the whole world. We have to care the same way that parent is holding their toddler back from that hot stove, the same way that the Prophet ﷺ was sat on Mount Hira thinking about the world, the same way that Prophet Nuh made dua for his people for so many years. There's a reason why all the prophets were shepherds, because they had to learn to care for animals that were just meaninglessly wandering everywhere. Because as Muslims, we understand this principle. We understand a principle that allows us to care in a way that is completely revolutionary. It's completely unheard of in the modern world. As Muslims, we know that infinity exists. We know that nothing depletes Allah's bounty. We know that we will always have the resources and the energy to care about others. We are not stingy because we know that it's, shaitan who threatens us with loss, who makes us think that we will lose out, that, if I give my time here, or I give my money here, or my energy here, well, then I won't have enough for myself, And that's how most of the world thinks. Most of the world thinks, and it prioritizes itself. But as Muslims, we're able to do so much more because we get our strength, we get our resources, we get everything from Allah. You have it in you, the same way that the prophets had it in them to care about the whole of humanity. You have it in you too to care about everyone. We have it in us. We have hearts that are big enough to do that. And the Quran, this is what we come to. The Quran is asking us to do something profound, something that is so abnormal in modern civilization. It's asking you to care about other people, even at the detriment of your own self. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran to stand for justice, even if it's against your own self. This concept of justice does not exist in the modern world. It has no contemporary or cultural basis in the modern world. Because actually, whenever you do, without religion, whenever you do something good, it's normally because it benefits yourself directly. Okay? So if, for example, you got a parking ticket that you shouldn't have got, and you stood up for yourself and you said, no, I shouldn't have got that parking ticket, that's something that benefits you. And then if it doesn't benefit you directly, it benefits you indirectly. So, for example, say you were out shopping and you saw someone be horrible to one of the employees in the shop, and you might go and stand up for that person, and you might be like thinking, well, Batul, that's a completely selfless act, like I stood up for that person. That's not a completely selfless act, because sometimes we do things because it feels good to do them. And Islam lifts this concept of justice, because take that same scenario, but say you're at work and it's your boss who's saying something horrible to one of your colleagues. Would you say anything now that it's your job that's at risk? Say someone, say someone hit your neighbor's car, for example, and you spend all night helping them try to find out who did it. And then it turns out that it was your own son who did it. How would that change the circumstance? I hope I'm getting across the point clearly. It's this idea that Islam elevates justice. It's the kind of justice that you don't see anywhere else in the world. It's the kind of justice that's against even your own self, and it's the kind of justice that is fair. This is one of the attributes of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, that you have to be fair in what you're doing. So if it's your son coming home at 1 a.m., how do you feel about that? And how do you feel about it if it was your daughter? If we're critical about how someone is dressed in public, but then maybe it's our own daughter and we beautify her and we put her in a hall filled with strangers on her wedding day. If you dislike one thing but you're okay with the other, then there's a double standard. And that double standard exists in most cultures, in most traditions, but Islam came to eradicate it. True rectification, truly fixing the earth and beautifying it again, is to do what Allah asks us to do without even thinking about how it may or may not affect us. We just do it because Allah asks us. It's to have that trust. It comes back to that running theme of today's talk. It's just like those birds who have that full trust in Allah. And the interesting thing is, this Quranic concept of justice, that's why it's so soft and it's so gentle. There's no violence, there's no uprising. it's about our interactions with other people. It's about being gentle. It's about changing the world, really. And and I keep emphasizing justice and being balanced and fair, because actually it's a big issue within our communities. It's a big issue within the world at large. And sometimes we forget, was it Ibn Taymiyyah actually said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the justice loving government, even if it's a non-Muslim government. If it's just, Allah loves that government. That's how important it is, because justice leads to taqwa, because you are focusing on Allah's commands. You're not focusing on your own feelings or how it benefits you or how it doesn't. And when you care that much, and when we start caring that much about other people, then we become gentle. We become gentle in the way that we speak. And we see this in the Quran again and again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Musa alayhi salam was told to go to speak to Fir'aun, he was told to be gentle. Our behavior and our intentions match in that way. And we have to ask ourselves, if we are telling someone to do something good, and we're harsh in such a way that it turns them away from doing the right thing, what have we really achieved? And the third requirement that we've got up on the screen is knowledge. So that basically means you need to know what you're talking about. Before we can go, gallivanting around changing the world, we need to know what we're talking about. We can't be, and we especially important with children, because sometimes we will tell children sort of superstitious things. And then when we tell them actual, practical, real things from Quran and Hadith, like reading Surah Falaq and Surah Nas, they don't understand, or they don't believe that actually has an impact. And that's really the checklist. These three things are the checklist of what you need to do if you're going to be enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And now, I think many of us, having heard that, might be thinking, well, that checklist sounds very difficult, so I might not enjoin the good or forbid the evil. The only issue with that is, sorry to say, you're going to have to, because that is part of the job description of being a Muslim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that this is part of who we are as a community. Being part of this nation, being part of the ummah, is that we have to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Because actually, like I said before, many of us born into Islam, but that doesn't mean that our children will be Muslim. That doesn't even mean that we will die upon Islam. I pray that we will, but that doesn't mean, we have no guarantee. We have to fulfill our job description, otherwise we can get fired at any point. So this heritage that we're so proud of, many of us are proud of our families and our background. We're so proud of it. But Allah gave it to us, and Allah can take it from us. To Allah belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. Allah can honor who He wills, and Allah can disgrace whoever He wills. And so, again, I realize that this is quite intense. There's a lot going on here. And the modern way of doing things is to be neutral. A lot of times when we're speaking to people and sort of an awkward topic comes up, something that's a little bit harder to speak about, we sit there quietly. We think being neutral and not saying anything is the best way to go about things. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us something really important in the Quran over and over again, that just being a good person and sitting on one side is not enough. When we let me think. Well, take the example of Bani Israel. They were prohibited from fishing on Saturdays, and one group of them fished, one group of them didn't fish, and one group of them told the others that they shouldn't be fishing. And when the punishment of Allah came, it came upon the group that was fishing and the group that sat and said nothing. I hope that's making sense. Sitting and doing nothing, being neutral, just sitting in our own homes and saying, I'll just be a good person. I'll pray my salah, I'll give my zakat, I won't bother anyone. I live in my little home. That's enough for me. It's not enough. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do more, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do more because we can do more. Sisters, we can do more. We have more in us to give. And that brings us on to our next checkpoint. There is no loss. There is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything you have in your life is from Allah. Your time, your energy, your health, your children, the house you're living in, everything comes from Allah. And it's your job. Your job is to distribute what Allah has given you in the right way. When we give money, we don't lose money. We're transferring it from this bank account in this life to our bank account in the hereafter. When we use our energy, it's the same thing. You don't lose out in any way. And so this covers the main bulk of what I wanted to speak about, and we're going to build from here a few more things. But building on what we have, what I mean by that is morality. We all have morality in us. We all know what's right and wrong. And as Muslims, we should be working towards building a world that's defined by the divine, defined by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. Now, inshallah, I hope everyone is like pumped to change the world. And the question is, can you do it? This is the question. I've been speaking about huge concepts, and I know many of us are thinking, well, gosh, I don't know if I'll be able to do all of that. The simple answer is yes, you can. And the longer answer, which I'm about to give, is to do with the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is this idea that a butterfly's wings were flapping several weeks ago, and it could set off a chain of events that leads to a tornado. This is what the butterfly effect is. Now, the butterfly effect and changing the world and Isla, what that means is that our individual changes, these small things, like the butterfly flapping its wings, could lead to a tornado. The small things we do day to day can create a bigger change. It can create a bigger change in a direct way. So if all of us always told the truth, then we would have a more honest society, but also in an indirect way, like the butterfly, not waking up for Fajr and some atrocity on the other side of the world can be connected. This Ramadan, I know everyone is going through this personal journey. I want everyone to understand these steps that you're taking, they're not small, they're huge. All these steps you're taking for personal development are huge because they will lead on to bigger things, the same way those butterflies' wings have. And if there is one thing we could pick that is at the heart of changing ourselves and changing the world, the one recurring theme, the one thing I want everyone to take away from today is character. Character is so important that we're living in a society that right now that isn't religious, but everyone still wants to be viewed as a good person. Even people who do objectively horrible things still want to be seen as good. Character and actions are interlinked. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, there are loads of examples where Allah is telling us about mannerisms and etiquettes and how to behave and how to have good manners. We see it in Surah Hujurat. We see it when even things like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling Musa alayhi salam to take off his shoes when he was on the Mount of Tur. All of these things. And then we see it indirectly as well in the Quran. There are so many examples, literally so many examples. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam saying, Ya Abati, speaking to his father with good manners. We see in Surah Luqman, if you want to learn about good character, read in Surah Luqman about how he instills those good morals in his son. And then the leading on from the Quran, we see in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that I have been sent only for the purpose of perfecting good morals. Morality can change the world. Good morals, good character can change the world. And if you're thinking about how on earth can just being good and kind change the entire world, Thank you for thinking. And it brings us back to our theme of the talk thus far, which is actually birds. And I want to remind everyone of the story of Prophet Ibrahim when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does Allah give life to the dead? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Prophet Ibrahim to put, the four birds on the four corners. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained. The reason why I'm bringing up this story is Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam asked that question so that his heart could be firmer on the truth, essentially. He wanted it to increase his faith. And this takes us back to something that we mentioned briefly earlier. We have to change the heart. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was strengthening his heart with that question. And that is the problem that most modern talk shows get wrong. That's the thing that goes wrong in history. This is why history is filled with like ethnic cleansing and divide and conquer and all of these horrible things, is because we forget something that is so inherent to our nature, which is our hearts and our intellect. That's what we need to change. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran appeals to our heart, appeals to our intellect, because Allah knows us better than we know our own selves. You can conquer, but you can't convert by force. You can't force people to change their heart. And the best way to change someone's heart, the most influential way to change someone's heart, is to have good character. There's a book called The Most Influential People in the World, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was number one in that book. Why? Because good character wins people's hearts, and good character can change the world. If you look at any social media project, take Black Lives Matter, how did that happen? It started with a story, it started with emotions, it started with the heart, and that led to change. That led to a change in the law, and that process is from Islam. This idea of working person by person, giving dawah person by person, this is from Islam. And that is within the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, where he is sending letters to various rulers. We see it in Prophet Musa alayhi salam's life as well. Him addressing his public address to Pharaoh. This idea of we change the hearts of people by being good, and that will lead to a change in law. So yes, good character can change the world. So it's important when you're making all your sort of Ramadan plans on personal development that you're thinking about the bigger picture and how you fit into that bigger picture. Because actually, when we look at the Quran doesn't speak about focusing just on yourself. This is the beauty of Islam. It's not about being a monk. It's about making the world a better place. The Quran talks about systems of oppression. It talks about women's rights, but it goes right down to the root cause of equity and then establishes our rights and responsibilities. You got Black Lives Matter. Islam came and it broke down that system of slavery. When we talk about addiction, Islam came, the Quran was revealed and it weaned people off of drink. And then altogether, Islam came and it got rid of the system of interest. How did it do it? It did it by making people more charitable, by making people kinder and more empathetic, to the point where the idea of benefiting and capitalizing on someone else's poverty was just abhorrent. That's how Islam did it. And we see it with environmental structures as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He explains to us how to treat the world around us, how to treat the physical space around us. And the way to do all of these things, to overcome these systems, is through a change in mindset and through a change in our heart. And now the question really is, and the question that I've been building to really, is that where are we in this system? When it comes to Black Lives Matter and racism and feminism and women's rights and all of these things, where are we? Genuinely, where are we? Are we kind of not really that involved, and then when it becomes mainstream about 5 months later, we say, hey, yeah, Islam said that too? Or are we at the forerunners? Are we the people at the front? Look at Surah Waqi'ah. If you've got your phone or your laptop there, read the verse. Have a look at the verse. There's only going to be a few from later generations who are able to do it, who are going to be the forerunners who get there first. Let's not wait. Let's be the first to have that discussion about gender, and to be the first to have that discussion about the mental health crisis. Because really, we are living in a crisis point. And it is our job as Muslims to destigmatize mental health problems, but also to point out that it's a euphemism for spiritual health problems. There's a gap in people's lives that can't be filled except with Allah. And we need to be the forerunners of that change. And I realize, and I will say this multiple times, that this is a huge ask. This is a huge thing that I'm putting before you today. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out where we fit in this bigger picture. And I'm not sure if anyone's ever had to write like a bio for social media or for, I can say social media platforms on here, but you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't ask us to define who we are in 250 characters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you're a kind person, that's okay. If you're working in community, if you're a good mum, if you're social, all of this is part of your religious identity. If you look at the screen, the idea is that instead of just beautifying this one little aspect of our life and being religious in this one, hour period where we pray Tarawih and nothing else, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't pick and choose your Islam. Do it everywhere. Your religion should encompass everything. And that's why when we look at the earlier Muslims, they weren't, talking about how do we do hifz in 100 days. They were talking about how do we weigh things fairly? How do we physically weigh things, in the marketplace fairly? They were talking about these small details because they understood that religion is about it all. Religion is not about that beautifully colored little blue circle on the screen here in the corner. It's about everything. It's about our whole life. And so the question is, how do we go from that theory to action? How do we make that circle into that big circle that takes up our whole life? The answer is belief. When we believe that religion actually works, then we will implement it. If we truly believe that Islam is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is the best way of life, then it would influence everything we do. There's a reason why the lowest form of faith is just to feel it in your heart, and the highest is to actually enact change. I know many of us are going on a spiritual journey this Ramadan. And in fact, it's quite mainstream at the moment. A lot of non-Muslims as well are getting into spirituality and yoga and mindfulness and all of this kind of stuff. But we have to have an end goal. It's not enough to just say, I'm going to memorize more, or I'm going to read more tasbih, or I'm going to do tahajjud. All of these are beautiful acts, but it's not enough. It's hollow on its own unless we are also working to better our world, to better ourselves, our family, our community, our world around us. True spirituality, if you're going to talk about spirituality, true spirituality is the kind of thing that makes you want to change the world. And that brings us on to checkpoint number 4. Changing people's hearts will change the world. Changing people's hearts will change the world, and character is the way to do that. Changing our own heart, improving our own spirituality is the way that the world is going to change in the end. And we, like I said earlier, we are at a crisis point. The world in the next 20 years will be unrecognizable for our own children. We are in such a crucial point in history to make a real change. So what are the obstacles? Because we've spoken about making that change. And the biggest obstacle to that is to Isla, to fixing the world, is fasad, which is corruption. And the biggest corruption that we know of is shirk, which is to associate something with Allah. And why? Why is that the case? Inshallah, I'll take a few minutes just to explain this concept because it is so important and it's the fundamental of who we are as Muslims. The reason why shirk is the worst form of corruption is because it creates a power imbalance. When you start putting money and culture and tradition right up there with Allah, then it just creates a huge mess. I know it's not a technical term, but that's literally what it does. It just creates a huge mess because for many of us, the idea of bowing our head down to a statue made of wood is abhorrent. We hate that idea so much. But yet, how many of us are bowing our heads down to paper? You know, how many of us are a little bit reluctant to distribute zakat or inheritance and these kinds of things? Sometimes idols are not what we think they are. Sometimes idols are the things that we compromise our morals for, the things that we ignore Allah's commands for. Whatever it is that we're centering our life around that isn't Allah will create chaos. And to have true Isla, to truly fix the world, we have to get rid of all of those false idols, to take everything off and put that yoke of Isla around your neck and follow it all the way back to Allah. And that's what the kalima is so beautiful because it does this. It says, La ilah, no God. It negates everything else. There is nothing else except Allah. And the beauty of this is that it enables change. If we're going to look at actually Medina as almost a case study of this, but in Medina we see this, that Medina is where everyone came together and we unified on one idea, this idea that Allah is on top and we are all beneath and we are all slaves of Allah. And that unity of purpose allowed the Prophet ﷺ to create a utopia in Medina. This is a utopia where zakat was given, women had their rights, interest was forbidden, you didn't capitalize on others' poverty, like a beautiful world. Like Medina is the ideal of what we need to try to make the world into. And in order to do that, we have to work together and have that united vision, because that is what rectification of earth is asking us to do, to have a united front. And so in order to do that, it comes back to this idea of character. Because when we are good, wholesome people, then from amongst us a leader will rise. Leaders come from the people. If the people are good, the leader will be good. And we have such beautiful examples in our history of what leaders were like. You know, you got Umar ibn Khattab. There's the story of how, you know, he was doing his night watch. Inshallah, I won't tangent too far, but essentially he was doing his night watch. He found someone who was, the kids were crying, and then he found out they didn't have any food, and then he rectified that situation. And, you know, the woman basically said that it is the responsibility of the Khalif to be watchful and aware of the needs of the poor. She said this to the face of the Khalif, but my point being is that leaders have a huge role, and they should have, their role is that they have a level of concern for each other. And that's what we all need, this level of concern for each other, whether we are the leader or whether we are a team player. Because actually, where do we fit into this collective? Most of us are not, you know, CEOs of huge companies about to, you know, most of us are normal people listening to this. Most of us are team players, and actually being a team player is a very difficult thing to do. And it's one of the most important things to do, because it's about sharing your views, but also letting go of your views for the sake of Allah and for the sake of the ummah at large. You know, when you think of us, this whole ummah, we're like a bunch of bricks, and each of us have to take a little bit of weight in order to build something meaningful. And so sometimes looking at Medina as our example of a utopia. When you read about Medina going forward, I want everyone to remember that Medina is the kind of world that we want to build everywhere. That city, that is the utopia, that is the goal, that is the gold standard. And that's what we're working towards. Because many times we forget that. We forget about what the bigger aim is and what we're trying to achieve. And that leaves us on to checkpoint number 5, which is our final checkpoint, which is teamwork makes the dream work. We have to work together. You know, just take Islamophobia, for example. It doesn't matter how good you are on an individual level, unless the whole ummah is good, people's perception about Islam is not going to change. We need each other and we need to work together in order to make that change. And the time to do that is now. The time to do that is now. We're at a critical point. We're at a critical point for our own self-development and for the development of the ummah at large. And the beauty, I'm just going to touch on one or two things now. The beauty of Medina and the beauty of creating a utopia of like this is because it's the light that keeps on giving. Many times we separate religion and the secular world and things for various reasons. And sometimes even as Muslims, we feel a bit uncomfortable with this concept. But the beauty of something like Medina is that it benefits other people. You know, what did the Prophet ﷺ tell us? You know, he said that that person can't be a mu'min, the person whose neighbors aren't safe from him, or words to that effect. In other words, international relationships, mutual relationships between people is so important in Islam. And so a place like Medina is not just a safe haven for the Muslims, it's a safe haven for everyone. And so, although we live in this kind of world with, like I said, kind of frowned upon this overlap between religion and secular life, but I want to remind everyone about what we spoke about at the beginning, that it is our nature that leads us back to God. And when I say our, I mean Muslim and non-Muslim. We are all looking for the same things. We all want dignity. We all want protection of our wealth. We all want our life to be protected. We all want protection of our lineage. I mean, how many people have signed up? There's a very famous website nowadays that a lot of people sign up to find out who was your great grandfather and what was their genetic makeup and where did they live and all of this. We all want the same things, and all 5 of those things listed there, those are the basic principles of Islam in terms of Allah's law. How amazing is that? That as creation of Allah, we always wander back to Allah. You might want to call it spirituality, you might want to call it mindfulness, but at the end of the day, it's a gap that can only be filled with Allah. So we've spoken about having a common morality. We've spoken about Isla and Fasad as these 2 concepts, and that we can't just be neutral. And that looking forward, we don't know what the future will hold, but we need to know where we will be on that spectrum. And that working together to see that beautiful and balanced world is what we need to do. And so, time for rest. What is time for rest? In the same way, we will spend our time in the dunya working towards change. I know many of the sisters listening today have been working in Islamic work for years and years and years and years, probably more years than I've been alive. And I know there are many of us who maybe have not done anything before, you know? We're all on different parts of our journey. But I want to remind everyone of this, that you need to be patient with yourself and with the world when you're trying to make change. Because the only place where there won't be any need for rectification, the only place where we'll be able to close our eyes and find home like autopilot, the only place where there is only goodness and there's no grief and there's only peace and there's no need for us to work and work and work to make it better, that place is Jannah. That is the place where there are soft-hearted people. Those soft-hearted people who worked for Isla fil Ard, who worked for rectification of the world, Because if you try to make the world a better place, you have to care about other people. You have to. It makes you so selfless. It's not like any other political campaign or argument or any of the harsh contemporary cultural views and agendas of right and wrong and morality. It's not like that. The rectification that Islam talks about is so soft. It's so gentle. It's so gentle that these people who will enter Jannah and finally find a place where there is no rectification, these people, they will have hearts, and their hearts will be like that of birds. And that is the final, we've spoken about checkpoints, but this is the final destination. And so, inshallah, that's where I want to wrap everything up. And really, on a lighter note, we've spoken about birds and cats and lots of animals throughout all of this. And I just want, anytime you see a meme or any picture of a cat or a bird or see anything beautiful in nature, I want you to remember that, yes, that is your religion. That is our religion, Islam. Islam wants peace like that for the whole world. Inshallah, there's a lot of things I mentioned in passing. I've put up a screen that has references for basically all the verses that I may have mentioned and hadiths. You might want to take a screenshot and look at them in more detail. But this is just a snapshot. Inshallah, we'll move on to the activity. Don't worry, I'm not going to make everyone change the entire world in 15 minutes. But what I am going to do is I want to hear from everyone listening, actually, hear from a few sisters about what would your ideal world look like. Because at the beginning, we spoke about this. We spoke about this idea that you have to have it in your head of what you want the future to look like, and you have to work towards it, and you have to care, and you have to really want it. And I know that everyone listening today, you all probably have your own background, all have various things going on, and everyone has something they feel really strongly about. For me personally, I would say it would be homelessness. I think in 50 years' time, I want everyone in this country, everyone in the world to have a home. I think that's the most, that's the thing that means the most to me. And we know that Allah sets morality and what is right and what is wrong. But what I mean by this question, what would your ideal world look like? I want everyone to just reflect in themselves. What is the thing that means the most to you? What is the thing that you think, no, that isn't right? We spoke about how you have that feeling in your heart. What is that thing you think, no, that isn't quite right? I don't like that about the world, and I wish that would change. If I could change the world today, that's the thing I would change. So I want us all to just reflect. If anyone wants to share, please feel free, because I feel I've said a fair bit. I hope I've given everyone a bit of food for thought. I want everyone to just reflect, and if anyone would like to share what thing they feel passionately about, what's the thing they want to see?
Sister Parveen, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
I would like peace, just the bickering, disagreement, that people could live happily together, like in Makkah, Medina. Everyone there, doesn't matter what caste you are, what color you are, or where you're from, or what social circle, or how much money you have, that you're all equal. And I would like that. I would that, to me, that is a better world, that everyone is equal in money, and everyone is eating the same, being with happy with each other, being at peace.
That's really lovely, sister. And you're right, that idea of everyone living together in peace. And in order to achieve that, I think it's on each of us to give and to share, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's really what I'm trying to get at here, that to have that passion. It's so lovely. Thank you for sharing, because it's true. And I think a lot of us do want to just live in a more peaceful world. And we need to think about where our place is in making that world,
There's a comment there, equality and basic needs of human beings and peace.
And peace. Yeah. And it's that idea, isn't it? Everyone, there's that common theme, isn't there, Auntie, about everyone having their basic needs and being at rest and being at peace. And in order to achieve this, we all need to give. If everyone gives their bits, if everyone understands that our resources and everything we have is from Allah, and we give with our open heart, then it's I keep coming back to birds, but it's like the birds, isn't it? Allah says they fly out hungry and they come back full. Because why? Because they trust in Allah. They trust in Allah the way that they should trust, and the way that we should trust as well.
There are some comments I can read for you. A world where everyone respects each other, children are children, are able to run around freely playing and not worried or abused. And another one is wealth to be distributed equally. I hate the idea of resources of works held by few people around the world. Justice in the world, those who've been harmed, justice is implemented. Something they missed. But basically, we're looking at equality and justice. That's what the theme of ideal world looks like, isn't it?
Yeah. And I like that one about safety as well for children, and children running around and just being happy, because actually that's something we can do. We're not all billionaires. We can't all end world poverty. But what we can do is look out for each other's children and make sure, the same way we care about our own children and our own family, and we would always make sure they're protected, to have that same sort of loving nature towards other people's children and wanting the best for others as well. We can create the world that we're dreaming of, really. Bismillah.
Do you know, when I was growing up, us children were very free to run around, and the neighbors can tell us off. If we were very naughty, the neighbors would not come and ask permission or tell our parents. They would just tell us off. So it seems that everybody was looking after the children because they can tell us off as well. Yeah. But now it's very restricted, and you can't even look at other people's children. So yes.
There's the change, doesn't it? Do you know what that reminds me of? This a narration at the time of like the Sahabas. I can't remember from the top of my head who, but essentially he went into someone's home and he just started, he helped himself to some dates, and the person next to him was like, oh, you shouldn't really do that, you should ask. And he said, this isn't how we do things. We're comfortable with each other. That's what Islam is, that having that kind of family feeling and looking after each other and feeling open with each other.
Yes. There is another comment. The oceans are also seeing this facade. Yes, because we are not looking after protecting the earth ecosystem. So we are not looking after the earth, let alone our own children. So we're not looking after the earth as well. The amount of plastic we have accumulated around the world.
100%. And we alluded to this earlier, actually, that environmental oppression and this idea, it's a systematic problem that we all need to work towards fixing, really. We all have a role to play. There's not it's not just...
Yeah, go on, please.
I was just going to say, it's not just one sister sat there pouring oil into the ocean. It's all of us doing little things, and we all need to work on it to look after Allah's world.
But one thing I've just scribbled on my notes is we are lacking good manners so much, aren't we? Especially within the families. And when we are outside the house, we try to be, we do good manners and we try to be very polite and patient and all that. But when we come inside our own houses and, within our comfort zone, when we just take off hijabs, we are much more relaxed. We can be a little bit too relaxed when it release our anger sometimes, and not checking our manners with our children as well, not very polite to them. So I think Ramadan is one of the best time to check ourselves, especially within our homes, because if we are good inside the home, then we definitely will be more patient outside the home. So that's something I just scribbled down for myself.
And we're all sat at home, so I think it's very relevant. And it's that beautiful thing, isn't it? We forget that our behaviors in our private life not only affects, our families and the people around us, but it affects the community and it affects the ummah. We see horrible things happening in the ummah, and sometimes we forget that actually, that small thing we did or said, that's contributing to facade, that's contributing to corruption, and it's leading to bigger problems. Even if we can't see a direct link, we trust in Allah's wisdom and that Allah is seeing what we are doing in those situations, and that there is a negative impact to that. So I think that's a really lovely point, especially with lockdown, especially.
That's right. That's right. So I don't know if there are any more hands, sisters. If you want to, contribute your own comment, your own feedback of today's. It was an awesome session, really, very thought-provoking, and a lot of thinking and a lot of, I think, self. Like you said, to look after ourselves and first check ourselves before checking other people, how we are dealing with the world around us. Let's have a quick look if there is. I don't see any hands now. And we've got just 5 minutes left, and we can show today's appeal as well. There you are. What's today's appeal is hifz of Quran. Every generation in Islamic history, there is a special, people establish areas and institute where children and even grown-ups can hifz Quran. This is one of the responsibility as a Muslim on our shoulders, that this Quran should not only be in written form, it should be in our hearts. And if, God forbid, something happens and all the books are gone, then Quran will never be gone, because it will be in our hearts. And it's amazing to see a little child reciting such a huge book. It is only the mercy and miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So putting a share in it is actually doing that duty that every Muslim have in every generation. So UK Islamic Mission do special arrangement for children hifz Quran. And that's about it. I think we can, if there's anything else, Batul, you want to say, otherwise we will take our leave, inshallah. Remember us in your du'as, please.
Jazakallah khair. I think that is all really just for everyone to remember that we have our individual goals for this Ramadan and our bigger goals, and to have a vision for the Ummah and think about what we are doing to achieve that vision. We all want a role to play. We want to be sat in Jannah talking about what we did to make, eating fruit and talking about what we did to make the world a better place. We want our story to be able to tell. Inshallah, may Allah make us amongst the righteous. Ameen. And inshallah, we can conclude today's session. Jazakallah khair. Thank you everyone for joining. Subhanallah.
My mic was off and I was talking to the wall. So Jazakumullah khair, Dr. Batul. It was a very thought-provoking and a beautiful session put together. Inshallah, we will meet tomorrow, same place, same time. Remember us in your du'as and we will remember you. Take care. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu la ilaha illa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.